that's near you. Say, neighbor. Oh, good neighbor. Good neighbor. The bishop's going to talk about faith alignment that does not make sense. Say, neighbor, that's the kind of faith I'm operating in now. That's the kind of alignment I'm operating in now. I'm going to be so aligned. If they're worshipers, I'm going to be so aligned that I want to operate and be aligned with faith that does not make sense. Is there anybody on board? Is there anybody who wants to be in that place, to come in that kind of alignment, faith alignment, and it does not make sense? The book of Romans here that we have read from the 4th chapter is a very powerful book of the New Testament. For in the book of Romans, we find the various doctrines of the faith. In the book of Romans, you can find the doctrine of salvation. You can find the doctrine of justification and sanctification and glorification, condemnation. And Paul wrote this book as he instructed the church then. And as we continue to gain insight concerning the operations of the kingdom, he has been teaching concerning God's righteousness as coming through faith in Jesus Christ versus righteousness that comes from the law. And so we have here in the beginning of chapter number 4, the verses there, that Paul is discussing how Abraham received his righteousness even before Christ Jesus came. And at the end of the chapter, we discover that God counted Abraham's faith and obedience as righteousness. And we come down to verse number 17 as he is teaching, and he says that, as it's written, I have made you a father of many nations. Speaking of Abraham, in the presence of him whom he believed God. And it is the God who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Somebody say, that's God faith. That's the kind of faith that we ought to operate in, a God kind of faith that calls those things that be not as though they were. Calls those things that you may not even have sight of physically, but by faith you believe that they are manifesting. That's God kind of faith. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, you need the God kind of faith. He says in verse number 18, who contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of nations, according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. Now understand that Paul shares how God told Abraham that I've made you, I've called you, I've sanctioned you to be the father of nations. And it was not in Romans that God said it, but Paul used it as an illustration and to validate his point that both Jews and Gentiles now all have the opportunity to be justified and welcomed into the family of God. Now, I want to focus on the alignment of faith that was necessary to obtain righteousness. And so that's what Paul is dealing with here. And he says that I've made you the father of nations. Now, Abraham had to align his spirit, soul, and body, which was hopeless, for the production of seed naturally. And so he had to bring everything into divine alignment. He had to bring his spirit, his soul, his body into alignment in order for what God had spoken to manifest as reality. Now he says, look at verse 19, it says, and not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's, his wife's, womb. Now, this infers that it is possible to have faith, but it not be potent enough to cause you not to consider a present circumstance. When I read this, it says, and not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. Then it suggests to me that there is the possibility to have faith, but the faith may not be strong enough to cause you not to consider your present circumstance. And so it tells me then that we've got to have strong, developed faith in order to accomplish and walk in the things that God has ordained.